The Venus Project, TeamSpeak Seminar, August 14, 2011.
Okay, I guess we'll start with the first question. Can you say something about critical thinking? Does it exist, or is it just another, quote, nothing word?
Critical thinking doesn't mean anything unless you specify what you mean by critical thinking. You mean engineering talk? Technical talk? Critical thinking is a process, and if you're not familiar with the process, no one can do critical thinking in a field that they have no experience in. How can the average person do critical thinking in chemistry, or density of concrete, or the ideal mixture, unless they're technical? So I don't know what you mean by critical thinking. To me, it means technically capable.
Would you associate it with the scientific method?
Yes, associated with scientific type thinking.
Will there be a government during the transition?
There will be general directions issued to people that are carrying out the Venus Project. There will not be a government. I don't know what government means, but there'll be information sources on how to proceed during the transition.
Why has private industry not built, copied, robbed, or patented the aeronautical systems that Jacques exposes in the documentary Future by Design?
Well, they don't patent it under the inventor's name. When you work for a corporation, everything you think of belongs to the corporation.
Actually, if they're talking about the electrostatic control processes that Jacques talked about, several years ago, there was a lab that came upon the same phenomenons and did patent it. I don't remember the specifics, but I remember there was an article in some scientific digest that I read, we both read, and we wrote to the person who wrote that article and talked to them and asked them to look up the Popular Science magazine in 1955 when Jacques was written about with this phenomenon, the electrostatic controls, and talk to them about the pioneer of that device, of that patent. It was the lab that did come up with this did take a patent out on it. The bottom line on that. Why did you drop the term socio-cyberneering? Wouldn't it make sense to have a term like that to define the Venus Project as done by other systems? In the 1970s, Jacques was using that word, socio-cyberneering. It was a nonprofit organization. It was when I first came in 1976. And most people couldn't pronounce the word. They couldn't remember the word. It was before the word cyber was really big. Norbert Wiener came out with the book, what was it, Cybernetics?
Yes.
And the word was known, but not to the general public. It wasn't in the general lexicon. So we dropped the word and just picked up the Venus Project because we live in Venus, Florida, and it was very easy. Now it would be nice maybe to have the word socio-cyberneering. It means much more to people now. Recently, I tried to explain to somebody that environment shapes human behavior and that the concept of, quote, free will is erroneous. That person answered me, but I can decide on my own what I will eat in a restaurant. What examples would you suggest to explain to him that it is not he who chooses?
Well, I would say when you're in a restaurant, it's a bad example. That has to do with your taste buds and your dietary habits. You taste something, and if you don't like the taste of it, you don't order it again. But that doesn't equate with the environment that I'm talking about. I'm talking about values, race prejudice, bigotry, wanting to be a banker. All that's influenced by the books you read, the motion pictures, the television you watch, and the people you admire. That influences your decision making. And in fact, everything you do is influenced by something. You may not always know what the influence is, but it is influenced by environment. An American Indian never orders a particular type of machine gun because it's not available. He doesn't even know about it. He can only get bow and arrows and things that he's familiar with from other Indians. But if someone were to come to him and said, have you ever heard of a directional compass? Well, the Indian may not know about that. So he can't make a decision outside of his frame of reference.
This might be the same person who was saying, I was telling a person about 10 examples I've heard from you about how environment shapes behavior. Still, I got, quote, it's just your opinion. What do you suggest for that situation?
Oh, he has to study anthropology, sociology to find out how environment shapes behavior. He can go to the library and get books out on the effects of environment upon behavior. An Eskimo never asked for a Mercedes car. It's outside of his frame of reference.
But if this person is trying to describe many different examples and he gets the answer back, it's just your opinion.
Well, that would be an ego problem, because the person wants to establish one-upmanship. They're not inquiring into the nature of what you mean. When they make a statement like, I make my own decisions, rather than inquire, what do you mean by how does environment affect behavior? If they pose a question, that's good. If they come up with, you can't change human nature, it's fixed, that's not a question, that's a statement. And we can't deal with that.
I'm a team coordinator. Sometimes people who express interest in the Venus Project say that they are not working, they are depressed, no one understands them, and that they're turning to the Venus Project for help. What is your best way to respond to them?
Well, you're looking for justice, that's what hurt you. The world never hurt you. You have expectations in the world of what you think might happen, and if that doesn't happen, that depresses you. So it's not the world that depresses you, it's your own expectations that are unreal. People always ask me, when will the Venus Project be built? I don't know that any more than anyone else. It depends on how much work you do, how well informed people are, how much publicity we're able to give it. It doesn't depend on me. If it depended on me, it would have been built in 1927.
Also, we're all damaged by this system. The only way to really help people who have the same problems, who are depressed and feel self-pity, is to go work with others. Get out of yourself and take on other ideas, learn about the Venus Project, learn how the system superimposes values upon you, and then work with other people, changing other people. What would happen to small businesses during the transition to a resource-based economy?
They will go the way of big business also. They won't be significant.
Who will supply the services such as hairstyling and massage if they don't get paid to do so?
You mean during the transition?
Yeah, that's what the question
Those
is.
that can afford it.
Okay, you say we don't make decisions, we arrive at them. Who do you mean by the word we? Is it all people or just the Venus Project?
Anyone in a technical field, if a man's a chemist or a concrete expert, he has made studies of the concrete under different pressures, under different skyscrapers, and the answers that they offer are based upon statistical studies. They build a concrete cylinder and they put it in a hydraulic press and they destroy it. That is, they increase the, and they issue. That's what I mean by arrive at decisions. Putting something to test and then presenting your findings in a bulletin so others can do the same experiment if they wish to arrive at the same conclusion. And if they don't arrive at the same conclusion, it means that your testing is faulty.
I think the word we refers to those who are working in the fields, trying to work certain things out, putting things to test. It's not a particular group or those in an elite position.
If you want some development made, if your plumbing fails, you call the plumber. You don't call the butcher. And that's what I mean by we. The people who are involved in housing, mass production, education, that's what I mean by we. the people that are responsible for the values to come.
Do you think in a peaceful model of protest, the Venus Project would be presented in a bottom-up perspective and implemented without participation from politics in the first stages until it becomes inevitable for politicians to join?
We never have anything to do with politicians. I thought that was obvious. Politicians don't know anything, therefore we can't invite them in. If a politician comes in, he says, I have studied electronics, good, we'll use them in that area.
Yeah, this is another question from that person, but I think you answered it. I mean, might people be able to change their paradigm of thinking to deploy the Venus Project without politicians? Politicians have nothing to offer, really.
Well, people don't change their paradigm. They read something or they hear about something and they undergo change. They are changed by events. People don't change their mind about anything. If they don't believe man can fly and they see a plane flying over, they say, I've changed my mind. They haven't changed their mind. They've been changed by events.
Taking into account that right now gaming industry is larger than the movie industry, have you considered to focus more in games rather than films? A game can be experienced, an educational process more so, while a movie is just a show, and might also advocate the Venus Project to a larger number of people. Yes, we are definitely working on a game as well right now, and you can see this more so when the new website comes up, hopefully within 2 weeks, hopefully before that, but we'll say 2 weeks on the outside. We just met somebody who spoke with Andrew for a long period of time who wants to help develop this, who is in the field for many, many years, about 18 years, and he wants to help head this. So that's a very exciting thing. And all of the animations that we're doing right now that we have, and we have a lot more than we've shown recently, can be used in the gaming industry too. So we are working on a game, and we're very excited about it. Andrew, do you want to say anything about that?
Basically, there's lots of projects that we're working on. You can see them all at the Global Activism team page on the Venus Project website. One of those projects is a computer game, which is literally in first stages. You know, it's very, very early stages of it. We're just starting to knock up the game design documents. That's a process that may take a couple of months probably, going through it, chopping it up, making sure it's all as the Venus Project would like to be represented within a game. And then that's before we actually start thinking about doing artwork and actual programming, or a lot of the graphics that would have to be done for it. Initially, we're not looking at doing a 3D game. We are looking at doing 3D interactive simulations using CryEngine 3, which I believe is out tomorrow on public license, which is good news. So yeah, there's lots of stuff that we're getting involved in on the TVP design stuff. But obviously our main focus recently has been to get the TVP core teams and also the TVP activism teams, get the structure laid out for them properly so that they've got something to work with and a kind of scope of works to work within. That's going quite well. I'd like to stick on that for another couple of weeks, I think. Especially, you know, we're also developing up the new TVP website and TVP activism website and the Venus Expressions websites. So that's taken up quite a lot of time at the moment. But once those projects are out of the way, which is probably going to be within the next couple of weeks, our intent is for me to get on with the TVP design stuff. And obviously one of those projects will be the computer game. So that's it.
Thanks, Andrew. Does the Venus Project have an information pack that can be sent to schools in order that they can do a project on it? And this person says, as a teacher, I would have used that. We are working on a university course. We're calling it a university course right now, but those might be some of the things that some of the groups, the activist people, can join us with and work up these projects. But we are working on the course, and it would be good. We haven't geared it so much towards a high school or a college that could be given to schools and people can do a project, but that might be an interesting thing to work on. We may add that to the list. We would need more help with people to do this, though. Will people have identification numbers issued to them to obtain goods?
They will all be equipped with a chip, either in a ring or earrings or some other portion, but not implanted in the body. That chip will enable them to access things.
People associate that with a Brave New World type of scenario.
Well, I can't help what they associate it with, but I'm just telling you it has nothing in common with any system.
Will you ever cooperate with another organization working towards a resource-based economy? And what do they have to do to get approved as a cooperation partner by TVP activism? I don't know what other people mean when they say that they're a separate group working for a resource-based economy. We can't know what they're talking about. But if they want to join with us, Jacques originated that term and the definitions in terms of what that means and the values that go along with it and the city designs and changing people and changing values. So if they'd like to work with us in regards to arriving at a resource-based economy, this is great. Join us in the activism teams just as anybody else does. We do have other groups who are working with us cooperatively, like Pangea. Their main aim is to advocate the Venus Project and the resource-based economy. We also have different activism groups of the Venus Project in different countries who are setting up nonprofit organizations in different names, but still working under the same guidelines in terms of working with us towards activism and working with the Venus Project, but they're doing a nonprofit organization, so they have more access perhaps towards funding or grants or more activity that they can do in their country. And we do have other organizations that we're working with, like EZ. They're working cooperatively with us in different things and trying to initiate different things for the Venus Project. So, I would only say have people get in touch with us and talk to us about their ideas, or just go through and join the activism teams just like anybody else regarding the Venus Project.
It's quite a common misconception that there's this thing called the RBE movement, in the social sort of networks. The RBE movement is nothing more than a series of interpretations of Jacques' life's work. They're people that have come across the Venus Project. They've taken what they like of it, they've left what they don't like of it, whatever suits their values at the time. They literally want to try and reinvent the wheel when the wheel's pretty much been laid out for us. The reason we're all here at TVP Activism, or I'd like to think so, is because we understand that the Venus Project is a very good basis to get going on for a new civilization that's sane. And that's what we're working towards here. Now, if these other groups that call themselves stroke RBE really understood RBE and understood what the Venus Project was about, they'd be working with us directly, just like many of us here are. The fact that they aren't tells you that they don't fully understand what it is that we're advocating. So watch out for when you hear people say, oh, we're an RBE movement, we're an RBE. They're not. That's an interpretation, that's their interpretation of what they think a resource-based economy is, as it was defined by Jacques Fresco 30 odd years ago.
Thanks, Andrew. Sometimes these people who take it and take different aspects of it and call it a resource-based economy but want to do their own thing, it becomes, in some instances, more of an ego trip, I think. Okay, will there be any privacy in this world when there is no property, and how will that work?
Well, what you mean by privacy is people will not enter your home or order you out of your home or tell you what to do. The only privacy is your own values, the values that you pick up by your culture. And if you wish to retain those values, only the future will decide that. As we get through the transition, the new education system will certainly change our values. How much they will change our values, I really don't know. So privacy would be a question for the future and the education systems. I always advocated that people be completely transparent in their thoughts and ideas and learn to talk to each other about their value systems, about the new value systems. I don't know what you mean by privacy. In other words, can you evolve your own system independent of society? Yes, if you do want to move out of the system, you can do that. You don't have to live in the Venus Project. You can live elsewhere if you want to and live your own lifestyle, but you're not part of the Venus Project. The Venus Project decisions are based upon that which enhances the lives of everyone. And if you're not of that view, I don't think you'd like the Venus Project.
I think there'd be less need for this concept of privacy in the future when people are all out to help you instead of how it's kind of vulturism today. Everybody trying to make a buck off of everybody else's back and take advantage of one another. And people are very judgmental today because of certain values that they do have. You tell somebody you're trying to be open and tell somebody your father's been in prison for 20 years, they have judgments about that. So they treat you differently. They talk to you differently. So you become more private. You don't talk about those things when you've been put down for certain things. I don't think the values of the future will be like that at all. Can you imagine a decision that would need to be arrived at that cannot be done scientifically or technically before the second city is built? If so, what decisions, how are these decisions arrived at?
You'd have to give us an example of what you're talking about. I don't know any decision that can be made without arriving at it. In the scientific field, you don't know how much weight an airplane can lift unless you do studies on it. And so without studies, I don't know what it means to come upon a decision that cannot be evaluated unless you give us an example of what you're talking about.
My experience with sensing energy has proven to be spot on, and I can sense underground currents, electromagnetic effects, and I have sensed what we term ghosts. What is your experience within what we can call paranormal science, and how does such science integrate with the Venus Project?
I don't know why I use the word science, but so far I have never experienced anything outside that cannot be evaluated scientifically. I have never had any experience with telekinesis or people moving objects without touching them. Every time I investigated it, it was either done by magnetics or special devices. I have never experienced anything extra-physical. I'm not close to it. I'm just telling you that in all my years, I've never experienced it.
The book Limits to Growth suggests that on the present path, the world economy would collapse this century. Would the established cities be economically independent, immune to this collapse?
If they have resources, they will survive until they're invaded by another country that doesn't have access to resources. I can't answer that specifically, only generally.
You know, it'd be difficult too if the government runs out of money and does a lot of austerity measures and eliminates medical help. When you have a growing population in one area, a large population in one area, if they eliminate waste disposal, picking up waste, as they have in some countries, as things got bad and disease spread more so, and getting food is difficult, it's going to be even harder in the large cities if there are large groups of people who are hungry. Is that true during the last Depression?
Not quite. It never got quite that bad.
Where should project cities be built? Which nations will allow them in their jurisdiction, given the strength and reach of the present economic paradigm?
I can't tell you what other nations will do, but if we build a first city, I would like to build it in the tropics, where energy is more available or where geothermal energy is available.
This person is asking for costs of the first cities, and so you can approach donors with the idea. You know, a lot of people come to us and want costs for different types of cities, different sizes of cities, you know, for different populations. in different locations with access to resources, near or far. We couldn't give costs for anything until somebody comes to us and says, okay, we want to build a city in this particular location for so many people. It's this far from certain resources, and they say what they want in it. I mean, this is for an outside city job, as I think this person is talking about, somebody coming to you and asking for a city. We'd have to do a lot of research on that. We'd have to do a lot of blueprints. We'd have to do a lot of engineering blueprints for that specific size and type of city and location of city, and then get quotes on something like that. And that changes from year to year. So where we are going to do more detailed blueprints for certain cities that Jacques has, we have detailed blueprints for older ones, but we're going to update certain ones. We are going to do that and get quotes, but it's just very difficult to have just such an abstract question like that. It's just like saying, how much would it cost to do a house? They don't specify the size, where it is, how many people will be there, how much technology do you want to use for energy efficient systems. There's just too much to take into account for that. You really have to do a lot of work and get a lot of funding even for blueprints to arrive at an estimate.
In the Venus Project, the question is not how much will it cost. It's do we have the resources? And if we have the resources, we can do it.
Yes. What I was talking about was a city today. If we start the first city, how would we defend ourselves from those countries against us?
Well, you'd have to study what our approach is to countries against us. In other words, we have to take on the job of assuring those countries that we are no threat to them. We will help them in every way we can. We're not a threat to any nation or any group of people. We don't hate communists, capitalists, fascists. We understand their predicament. We understand that they're brought up under certain cultural values, that all people reflect their culture. They're not responsible for their behavior, although you've been taught for years that you're responsible for your own values. I don't buy that. And if you don't understand the Venus Project, you'd better become familiar with how people get to be the way they are.
Do you see the implementation of debt-free currency as a potential bridge during the transition between the monetary system and a resource-based economy, using debt-free currency?
No, I don't see that at all. I just see that we have a long way to go to get the majority of people to vote in. The majority of people, if they vote in a resource-based economy or the Venus Project, then we will have a procedural system. I can't tell you what that is during the transition. It means there's many different values going and many different collisions of values. And so the transition, as I said many times, will be very painful.
Yeah, they're referring to this as something that was implemented during colonial America in the 1970s. This was introduced by Bill Stills. He did the movie The Money Masters, which was really very good, but at the end he advocates this debt-free currency as the answer. But we feel that with our technology today, you don't need to go on to any type of currency system whatsoever. You'll get a lot of the same aberrant behaviors and same problems using money as you have today.
Earlier in today's seminar, Jacques was talking about identification items that can be worn on a person, such as rings, bracelets, earrings, or whatever. If somebody in the Venus Project were to lose that identification item, how would he or she get a replacement?
They're given a code and they have access to information that would trigger the resources and make them available. Well, it helps. It just makes it easier for the social system to operate. When you approach a distribution center and you ask for 10 radios, you're not going to get it unless you indicate the reason for the 10 radios. In other words, if you want a television set, you request it. But if you've already requested it and it's underway, nothing will be delivered. And if you request things that do not make sense, you're told to check in with a certain department, and that department will evaluate you. You can't abuse the system. Out watchdogs. If you've already ordered a TV set, it will be known that you represent a value system that's distorted or aberrated. No one asks for 100 glasses of water. If you do, it's usually a mental problem. But you have to just state what it is that you want and why you want it. Just as it is today. If a man says, I can drive 5 cars at the same time, I don't know what they're talking about. What do you do when you get an aberrant request? It's the same sort of thing, only you don't have as many in the future. Today you have a lot of crap on the air. In the future you won't. Because people will be raised with a different value system. And they just don't go to school like they do today, but they learn about their relationship to nature and one another. And they become very skilled at language and what they are referring to. It's not as haphazard as it is today.
People wouldn't be disciplined, they'd be helped if they have that type of aberrant behavior where they're just trying to store 20 televisions and have no need for it. Yes, I would just wanted to add that they wouldn't be put in jail or anything like that.
In a resource-based economy, do you feel that people would end up being spoiled? If everybody had access to anything and everything, would they just take it all for granted?
No, I do not think so. Because they're not just educated on how to access things, they're educated in how to make choices that help everybody rather than just themselves. People are not oriented that way. You're talking about people in the present culture that have access to things. Yes, they will take advantage of it. But people educated in the methods of the Venus Project social operation will not use those systems.
It's like saying, is a lab that's well equipped for whatever they need to do research, scientific research, does that spoil them? No, it makes them more constructive and participatory. So everyone can participate and take advantage of their findings and their upgrades of society.
Also, you have to bear in mind, in this system, for example, if you've got limited access to everything in this system, it's all based on how much money you've got. If you're poor, you haven't got access to the things that rich people have got access to. So if something, like for example, if there was a fence around, a load of really expensive jewellery and things like this, and you couldn't get in, okay, all the rich people have already got that jewellery, they'll just walk past it, not too interested, because they've got better than that anyway. But all the poor people would be dying to get inside there and get in that fence. Well, if you open that fence for 2 minutes, you can guarantee everyone will run in there and grab all the stuff and they'd loot it and they'd be gone. That's not because they're bad people or because they've got bad values, it's because they've got limited access in this system to the things that they need. And by having access to that stuff, they can now go and sell it and then have access to other things like food or energy or housing or whatever. In a system where everything is provided for you as and when you want it kind of thing, as the Venus Project would be, it's a bit like walking into a restaurant and seeing 1,000 bottles of water. There's not a human being on this planet that, if they knew that water was freely available whenever they wanted it, they would not need to take 1,000 bottles. And I think you just got to think of it in those terms, and that applies to everything. If you go to a golf course and you want to use the best golf clubs that exist on planet Earth, well, they'll have those at the golf course. They won't have crap golf clubs because it's pointless making them. You're better off making good golf clubs that work and last for years. So the person would go in, they'd use the best golf clubs that exist on planet Earth, they'd have their game of golf or whatever, they'd put the golf clubs back, and then they'd go about their day. They wouldn't need to go and steal all of the golf clubs and store them in their home when they know that they can just go to the golf course and play with those golf clubs whenever they feel like it.
That's right, Andrew. It doesn't necessarily spoil things
system,
to have
yes.
things.
In this system,
It depends on how they use it.
in this system it does.
What would be the best method to bridge the nations together?
You have to teach them the methods of science so they understand. I don't want people to follow some leader. I want them to be brought up, educated to understand their decisions, how they arrived at, and the basis for it. I don't want people to follow a leader. That's fascism to me. By showing them the advantages of joining and become one nation on earth and acting to preserve and take care of nature and all human beings. This, we have to show the advantage of that over the advantage of independent nations. In independent nations, you have to maintain armies and navies, you have to maintain a police force and prisons. You don't need to maintain any of those things in a global system that uses the methods of science in arriving at decisions rather than the opinions of people based upon nothing but their immediate feelings.
I'm having trouble understanding how you arrive at decisions. I can see that for something that's in sciences, but for social aspects, I guess I'm having trouble understanding that.
Give me an example of the social aspects where there would be trouble.
For example, with, I don't know, I'm trying to think, it's not easy to think of something like sex education or, I don't know, I would have to come back with you next week with thinking about something exactly.
How about this? Some Muslim women wear what is called a burqa, which is a full body cloak. Recently in France, there was this heated debate about whether the burqa should be banned or not. Would you consider that to be a good example?
Oh, yes, that would be a good example, yes.
How would it be decided if there would be a ban on the burqa in a resource-based economy?
We don't concern ourselves with social customs of different cultures. Our main concern is the production of food, housing, transportation, and the necessities of life. Now, if you want to wear any kind of clothing, if you don't want to wear the clothing recommended, that's up to you. You don't have to conform. You can wear any kind of clothing you want to. You can believe in any religion you want to, but you cannot superimpose your values on telecommunication systems. You can tell people what you believe and why you believe it, but you can't twist anyone's arms or force anyone into your point of view. You can educate people into how to make decisions, how to arrive at decisions. The scientific method is not perfect, but it certainly is far better than just random opinions. No, they will make that decision as they learn more. Through the educational system, which discredits all things based upon nonsense or no experience, or no work being done to evaluate some proclamation or some issuance that a person puts forth that they believe in. If it cannot be checked by others and they don't arrive at the same conclusion, then you have unresolved conditions. And we post unresolved conditions, what we don't know, what we're unable to find out at this time. But people will be working on all ideas. And if we can't evaluate it, we will announce that we don't have the means to evaluate that.
Maybe if a study group had found that kissing transmit diseases, how will that behavior be diminished?
Well, you'll announce it on the media that kissing transmits diseases. In Iceland, they used to rub noses. So kissing is just a social custom. Whatever they find out in the future, they will announce. Whether people will carry that out depends on how long they've been indoctrinated to kissing. You can't legislate it out. You can only educate people not to drink water that is not filtered. If they don't understand that, they will become sick. I would say that the scientific method has more information that's valid than not using it.
You have to bear in mind that the system that we're in now, all of the aberrancies, all of the behaviours, all of the strange things that people do are a direct result of the environment that they're in. In other words, it's our environment that shapes our behaviour. And when you really understand that, you understand that when you change your environment, the behaviours change. So much of the customs, much of the things that go on in our society today simply would not exist because the environment would not support those behaviours. It wouldn't feed those behaviours. It wouldn't draw those behaviours out of a person or shape them in that way. As education of each generation in this new system, or even during the transition of this new system, each generation that comes forward would have a different way of thinking than the previous generation before them. If I think to how my dad's point of view on the world and everything else compared with mine, very, very different, and that's just in a couple of generations. If you imagine 2 generations from now, the values of the people being brought up in this new system will be very, very different to the values of their grandparents. Probably going to die soon and then die with their values. That's social change, and that's what you get by the changes in your environment.
And all that means too, in terms of, if you want to use the example of kissing, think of how much that's pushed on your TV, on your advertising, your radio, your movies, as being an admirable thing to do. I'm not advocating that or anything else, but I'm just saying that behavior is pushed throughout the culture on all medias. So if you wanted to change the value system too, you use all the different medias to introduce new ideas. You use the soap operas to not just rehash the same problems over and over again, but you use them to introduce new values and new ways of solving problems and new ways of thinking of the world that are more appropriate, more relevant to the real world.
Amongst youngsters, you start with children.
Yeah. Jacques is saying you start with children, if you don't hear that.
In RBE, what would be on television? Because I don't even own a TV today because just the shit that's on TV. So what would be the difference between TV today and a TV in a resource-based economy?
In a resource-based economy, all television will be geared to that which helps people. There is nothing else. Only information that would be useful. There's no soap operas, no romantic novels. None of the things you have on TV today. All news is managed. They manage the news because they don't want people to hear certain things. They don't want them to hear about military mistakes, errors made by generals. They don't want you to hear that. So all news today is managed. We don't manage news, we report events in the physical world. And if you have something to say about it, you offer information. You don't say, gee, we ought to learn to live in peace. How do you attain that? Without information on how you attain that, it's just a bunch of noise. Most of our language, most of our attempted communication is just a bunch of noise.
Does the Venus Project identify with what Thurston Veblen offered as a possible means of overturn in his book, Engineers and the Pricing System?
Thurston Veblen does not go into detail of how to affect human behavior, values, and judgment. People that read books by Thurston Veblen already know a great deal about what he's talking about. But if you put his book out before members of the Ku Klux Klan, they wouldn't know what the hell it meant. The assumption that a book can convince people to change their behavior is just an assumption. What they need is a great deal of experience more than listening to people or reading books. The future has a great deal of hands-on learning, meaning actual experience, rather than, although books will be used, experience and hands-on learning will become dominant in the Venus Project.
Sorry, Jacques, you just pulled up a really good point there, actually, and I want to touch on that while I'm here. Is that, there's a lot. We was talking earlier about the resource-based economy movements and things like this. Jacques spent 75 years of his life, that's 3 generations for most of us, that actually working in the field with human behaviour, with human values, with technology and science and scientists and technicians, and hands-on work with this stuff for 75 years, developing the ideas into the system that he's come up with for the resource-based economy, which will allow us to then implement the rest of what the Venus Project talks about. There are no other groups that I'm aware of that have put in anywhere near that kind of dedication or time and effort of actually hands-on, you know, actually getting in there, getting your hands dirty, and actually making sure that what you're talking about actually works. What you're discussing, what you're promoting to people is an attainable goal, and that's the real difference with the Venus Project. Is that it's actually been worked on for the past 75 years.
Yes, that's true, Andrew.
Very good example, actually.
Okay, I think that's it for today then. We'll close it down for today.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks, everyone.
Yes, I deeply appreciate your questions, and in the future, most of the questions that you ask are generally questions asked within the economic system that we live in now. The Venus Project offers a completely different value system, and you got to go to school, just like you go to school to study medicine, engineering, chemistry. People that operate the Venus Project are people that have taken courses in how to change human behavior without force, without military systems.
You can get more of this information on our YouTube media channel. I don't know if everyone's aware of that, but we're always posting things on there, and we're always making more lectures in regards to this direction on different topics as well.
May I just butt in there and remind the people that coordinate teams and what have you that for their members that don't speak English, the linguistic team is being encouraged to create YouTube channels for their own language. So to get in touch with your linguistic team coordinator to find out if they have a YouTube channel created where they're putting up all the videos that have been translated, and if they haven't, to give them a little push along and kind of insist nicely that they think about making one so that people can share these videos.
That's awesome, Sue. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
That's what we're doing. Oh, that's what we want the word to get out.
Appreciate that.